Stop scrolling for a second. If you're angry about the housing market, if you're tired of paying rent that costs more than a mortgage, if you feel like the American dream of owning a home is slipping away, you probably have a name in your head. You're probably blaming BlackRock? The internet is full of memes saying BlackRock is buying every single family home in America. But as we learned in our last series, that is not entirely true. BlackRock mostly buys bonds and stocks. The truth is, you are blaming the wrong giant. There is another company. A company that was once related to BlackRock but split away decades ago. A company that doesn't just manage index funds, but actively buys real, physical assets. They buy hotels, they buy warehouses, they buy casinos. And yes, they buy houses. Their name is Blackstone, not BlackRock. Blackstone, it's an easy mistake to make. They share a similar name. They share a similar history. But their business models are radically different. While BlackRock wants to own the stock market, Blackstone wants to own the physical world. They are the largest owner of commercial real estate on the planet. They manage over $1 trillion in assets. And the man leading them is not the mild-mannered Larry Fink. It is Stephen Schwarzman, a man known for his lavish lifestyle, his aggressive deal-making, and his belief that in the game of capitalism, you either eat or you get eaten. In this series, we're going to correct the narrative. We're going to look at how Blackstone capitalized on the 2008 financial crisis to become the biggest landlord in America. We will explain how they turned your home into a financial instrument. We will look at the controversy surrounding their rent hikes and evictions. And we will ask the question, is Blackstone the villain that destroyed the housing market? Or are they just the smartest investors in the room who saw an opportunity that everyone else missed? Welcome to the story of the real landlord. To understand the empire, we have to go back to 1985. The era of greed is good. Wall Street was booming. Stephen Schwarzman and his mentor, Pete Peterson, left the investment bank Lehman Brothers. They walked out with $400,000 of their own money and a Rolodex full of contacts. They wanted to start a mergers and acquisitions firm. They wanted to be the guys who advise CEOs on buying and selling companies. They named it Blackstone, Black for Schwartz, which means black in German, and Stone for Peter, which comes from the Greek word for stone. It was a clever little inside joke. But the beginning was humble. They sent out hundreds of letters to prospective clients, and they got 0 replies. It was a humiliating start for two men who were used to being masters of the universe. But Schwarzman is relentless. He has a drive that borders on obsession. He famously said, "I want war, not a series of skirmishes. I always think about what will kill off the other bidder." They eventually raised their first fund, and they entered the world of leveraged buyouts. This is a fancy term for a simple, brutal strategy. You find a company, you borrow a massive amount of money to buy it. You use the company's own assets as collateral for the loan. Then you cut costs, fire workers, sell off parts of the company, and try to sell what is left for a profit. It is a ruthless business, but it made them rich. Very rich. However, Schwarzman wasn't satisfied with just buying companies. He looked at the real estate market and saw a massive inefficiency. Real estate was a local game. It was fragmented. It was run by families and small developers. He realized that if he could bring Wall Street capital, billions of dollars of it, into real estate, he could crush the local players. So, Blackstone began to pivot. They became a real estate machine. They bought office towers. They bought hotels like the Hilton chain. But for a long time, they stayed away from one thing: housing. Single-family homes were considered a bad investment for Wall Street. They were too messy. You have to fix toilets. You have to mow lawns. You have to deal with tenants calling you at midnight. It doesn't scale. Then came 2008, the global financial crisis. The housing bubble burst. Millions of Americans lost their homes to foreclosure. Banks were sitting on hundreds of thousands of toxic properties. Prices in places like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Atlanta fell by 50%, 60%, sometimes 70%. There was blood in the streets. Families were being thrown out on the curb. Most people looked at this and saw a tragedy. Stephen Schwarzman and his team at Blackstone looked at it and saw the greatest buying opportunity in history. They realized something profound. All those people who lost their homes still needed a place to live. They couldn't get a mortgage anymore because their credit was ruined. So they had to rent. But there weren't enough rental houses. Blackstone decided to do something that had never been done before. They decided to industrialize the single-family rental market. They launched a project called Invitation Homes. They went to the courthouse steps where foreclosed homes were being auctioned off. They didn't buy one house. They didn't buy two. They bought thousands. They spent roughly $10 billion buying nearly 50,000 homes in a massive shopping spree. They bought them for pennies on the dollar. They bought them from desperate banks who just wanted to get them off their books. Imagine you're a regular person trying to buy a cheap foreclosure to live in. You show up at the auction with your savings, and standing next to you is a representative from Blackstone with an unlimited checkbook. You bid $100,000. They bid 110. You bid 120. They bid 130. You walk away empty-handed. They add another asset to the spreadsheet. But buying the houses was the easy part. Managing them was the nightmare. Remember, Wall Street believed it was impossible to manage thousands of scattered homes efficiently. Blackstone solved this with technology and scale. They brought in the same ruthless efficiency that Rockefeller brought to oil. They created a centralized management platform. They hired armies of contractors to renovate the houses. They standardized everything. Same paint, same carpet, same appliances. They turned unique homes into standardized rental units. They effectively created a McDonald's of housing. And then they did something even smarter. They realized that they had billions of dollars tied up in these houses. They wanted to get their cash back out to buy more. So they invented a new financial instrument, a single-family rental securitization. Here's how it works. They took thousands of these rental homes, bundled them together into a giant pool, and sold bonds to investors backed by the rental income from those homes. This is exactly like the mortgage-backed securities that caused the crash. But instead of mortgages, it was rental income. By selling these bonds, Blackstone got their cash back immediately. They could take that cash and go buy more houses. It was a perpetual motion machine of acquisition. They had successfully financialized the single-family home. Your house was no longer just a pile of bricks and wood. It was a line item in a bond portfolio owned by a pension fund in Japan or an insurance company in Europe. By 2016, Blackstone took Invitation Homes public. It was the largest IPO of a real estate investment trust in history. They had proven the model worked. And because they proved it worked, the floodgates opened. Other private equity firms saw Blackstone's success and jumped in. American Homes for Rent, Tricon, Progress Residential. Billions more dollars flooded into the market. Suddenly, the housing market wasn't just families buying from families. It was families competing against global capital. Blackstone argues that they saved the housing market. They say they stepped in when no one else was buying. They say they fixed up dilapidated houses and created high-quality rental options for people who needed them. They say they stabilized floor prices in neighborhoods that were in free fall. And from an economic perspective, they're right. But at what cost? They shifted the ownership structure of America. They took 50,000 homes out of the ownership pool and moved them permanently into the rental pool. Those are 50,000 families who are paying rent instead of building equity. And when a corporation owns the neighborhood, the rules change. A mom-and-pop landlord might give you a break if you lose your job. A corporation governed by an algorithm and a duty to shareholders, not so much. In the next part, we're going to look at the rent trap. What happens when Blackstone raises the rent? We'll look at the stories of tenants living in Invitation Homes. We'll examine the accusations of aggressive evictions. We'll also look at the massive wealth transfer that this represents. Is Blackstone creating a permanent renter class? And how is Stephen Schwarzman spending the billions he made from this strategy? Hint: it involves very expensive birthday parties. The real landlord is just getting started. In the old days, if you rented a house, your landlord was probably a guy named Mike or a woman named Sarah. Maybe they lived a few streets over. If you wanted to renew your lease, you would talk to them. If you were a good tenant who paid on time and didn't wreck the place, maybe they wouldn't raise your rent. Or maybe they would raise it just a little. To cover taxes. It was a human transaction. But when your landlord is a corporation owned by private equity, there is no Mike. There is no Sarah. There is only an algorithm. Blackstone and the companies it spawned, like Invitation Homes. use sophisticated software to set rent prices. This software scans the entire market in real time. It looks at supply, demand, income levels, and even the price of gas. It calculates the absolute maximum amount a tenant can pay before they break. This is called revenue management. It is the same technology airlines use to change ticket prices every minute. But when airlines do it, maybe you pay $50 more for a flight. When your landlord does it, you might pay $500 more a month just to keep a roof over your head. Critics argue that this creates a one-way ratchet. Rents go up, but they almost never come down. Because the corporate landlords own so many houses in certain neighborhoods, sometimes thousands in a single city like Atlanta or Phoenix, they effectively set the market price. If they decide rent is going up 10%, rent goes up 10%. And because buying a house is so expensive, tenants have no choice but to pay. This is the rent trap. You earn money. You pay rent. The rent goes up, so you can't save for a down payment. Because you can't save, you can't buy, so you must keep renting. It is a cycle that keeps the asset managers rich and the middle class poor. But raising the rent is just the beginning. To maximize yield, corporate landlords have invented a whole new economy of fees. Tenants report being charged for everything. A smart home fee for a digital lock they didn't ask for. A pet rent fee, not just a deposit, but a monthly tax on your dog. A maintenance fee, a convenience fee for paying rent online. It is the Spirit Airlines model applied to your home. The base rent is just the starting point. And then there is the maintenance. Remember, Blackstone's goal is efficiency. Efficiency means cutting costs. In the early days of Invitation Homes, there were thousands of complaints. Tenants reported waiting weeks for a plumber. They reported mold, leaks, and broken appliances. They would call a 1-800 number and get a call center in another country. Why? Because fixing a toilet costs money. And every dollar spent on a toilet is a dollar that doesn't go to the shareholders. Blackstone argues that their maintenance is better than mom-and-pop landlords because they have a professional network. And to be fair, they have improved over time. But the incentive structure is fundamentally different. A mom-and-pop landlord cares about the house because it is their retirement nest egg. A corporation cares about the house as a line item on a spreadsheet. If the cost of maintenance exceeds the projected return, the maintenance gets deferred. What happens if you can't pay? This is where the difference between a human and a corporation becomes most stark. A human landlord might give you a break if you lose your job. They might wait a week. They might take a partial payment. They have empathy. A corporation has a fiduciary duty to its investors. Empathy is not in the contract. Investigations by news organizations and housing advocates have shown that corporate landlords are often much more aggressive with evictions than small landlords. They file for eviction automatically, sometimes the day after rent is late. They have lawyers on retainer. They have automated systems to generate eviction notices. it is an eviction machine. During the pandemic, despite moratoriums, there were reports of corporate landlords finding loopholes to push people out. Why? Because in a hot market, a vacant house is an opportunity to raise the rent by 20% for the next guy. This ruthlessness is efficient. It protects the cash flow, but it creates a level of housing insecurity that damages society. Children have to change schools. Families are uprooted. Communities are destabilized. This is the dark side of efficiency. What is good for the investor is often terrible for the community. While families were struggling to pay these rising rents, the man at the top of the pyramid was doing very well. In 2017, Stephen Schwarzman turned 70. He threw a birthday party in Palm Beach. It reportedly cost $20 million. He hired Gwen Stefani to sing. He had camels. Critics looked at that party and saw a disconnect. The money that paid for the camels came, in part, from the rents. In 2019, the United Nations accused Blackstone of contributing to the global housing crisis. Blackstone issued a furious rebuttal. They said the UN's claims were baseless. Here is the twist that most people miss. Blackstone eventually sold out of Invitation Homes. They made billions in profit. They proved the concept, took the money, and left. But the model Blackstone created remains. The industry they birthed is now permanent. And Blackstone didn't stop buying real estate. They just moved on to bigger, more complex targets. Why buy a house when you can buy a warehouse? Why buy a home when you can buy a data center? They pivoted, and this pivot led to the creation of an even bigger monster. It is called BREIT, Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust. In the next part, we are going to look at the commercial real estate empire. While everyone was focused on Blackstone buying houses in the suburbs, Stephen Schwarzman was quietly making another bet. He looked at the retail landscape. He saw the rise of Amazon. He saw that people were stopping to go to malls and starting to shop on their phones. Most investors saw this as a disaster for real estate. Malls were dying. But Blackstone looked deeper. They asked a simple question. If people are buying things online, where are those things being stored? They realized that for every $1 billion in online sales, you need huge amounts of warehouse space. So, while other investors were fleeing retail, Blackstone went on a shopping spree. But they weren't buying stores. They were buying the plumbing behind the stores. They bought warehouses everywhere. In 2019, Blackstone bought a network of warehouses for $18 billion. Overnight, Blackstone became one of the largest owners of industrial real estate on the planet. The logic was flawless. Amazon, FedEx, and UPS were in a desperate race to deliver packages faster. They needed space near cities, but there isn't much land left near cities. So, the value of existing warehouses skyrocketed. This is a classic Blackstone move. They identify a macro theme in this case, the shift to e-commerce. And they invest with such massive scale that they effectively corner the market. Warehouses are great because boxes don't complain. But Blackstone found another asset class where the tenants effectively have no choice but to pay: student housing. In 2022, Blackstone bought American campus communities for nearly $13 billion. This company was the largest owner of student housing in the United States. Why student housing? Think about it. Universities are growing, but universities are broke. They can't afford to build new dorms. So, there is a massive shortage of beds. Students have to live somewhere. And here is the best part for an investor. Who pays the rent? Usually, it's the parents. It is a recession-proof asset. Even in a bad economy, people go to school. By owning the dorms, Blackstone positioned itself as the landlord for the next generation. But just like with single-family homes, this raised concerns. Rents in student housing have surged. Critics argue that by financializing student housing, Blackstone is extracting wealth from the future. For decades, Blackstone was an exclusive club. If you wanted to invest, you needed millions. But Schwarzman looked at the vast ocean of money held by regular rich people: doctors, lawyers, dentists, and he wanted it. So, in 2017, they launched BREIT, the Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust. This was a revolution. It allowed accredited investors to invest in Blackstone's real estate empire. The minimum investment was just $2,500. It was marketed as the ultimate safe haven. Invest like the billionaires. Steady income. Money poured in. Billions of dollars a month. BREIT became a $70 billion behemoth. It was using this money to buy the warehouses, the student housing, and the rental homes we talked about. For a few years, it worked perfectly. While the stock market was volatile, BREIT reported steady, positive returns. But there is no such thing as magic in finance. There is only risk that hasn't materialized yet. The problem with BREIT is the same problem we saw with Vanguard's bond funds, but worse. It is the liquidity mismatch. Blackstone promised investors they could take their money out, but the money was tied up in buildings. You cannot sell a warehouse in a day. You cannot sell a dorm in an hour. In late 2022, the tide turned. The Federal Reserve started raising interest rates aggressively. When interest rates go up, real estate values usually go down. Smart investors, particularly in Asia, started to get nervous. They looked at BREIT's reported returns. BREIT was saying, "We are up 9%, but the public real estate market, we're down 30%. How could Blackstone be up when everyone else was down?" Blackstone argued that their assets were better. They valued their assets based on their own models. But investors sniffed a rat. They started to withdraw their money. It started as a trickle, then it became a flood. In November and December of 2022, investors asked to pull out billions of dollars. Blackstone faced a nightmare scenario. If they paid everyone out, they would run out of cash. They would have to sell their best assets at fire sale prices. It was a classic bank run. So, Blackstone did the only thing they could do. They closed the gates. They invoked a clause in the contract that most investors hadn't read closely. It said that Blackstone could limit withdrawals to just 2% of the fund's value per month. Imagine telling a doctor who put his life savings into BREIT, I'm sorry, you can't have your money back. The headlines were brutal. Blackstone limits withdrawals. BREIT crisis. Stephen Schwarzman needed a win. He needed a white knight. In January 2023, he found one. The University of California. The University of California's massive investment office agreed to put $4 billion into BREIT. But when you read the fine print, it wasn't just a simple investment. It was a sweetheart deal. Blackstone essentially guaranteed the University of California a minimum return of 11.25%. If BREIT didn't make that much money, Blackstone would pay the difference out of its own pocket. This deal stopped the panic. The headlines changed. Smart money buys the dip. Blackstone survived. But the BREIT saga revealed a crack in the armor. It showed that even the masters of the universe are vulnerable to the basic laws of gravity. Blackstone is now stabilizing, but they have pivoted again. They are moving into a new area. They are becoming a bank. In the next part, we are going to explore the world of private credit. This is the new gold rush for Blackstone. To understand Blackstone's newest weapon, we have to understand what happened to the banks. After the 2008 crash, the government passed a massive set of laws called Dodd-Frank. These laws were designed to stop banks from taking crazy risks. Essentially, the government put the big banks in a straitjacket. But companies still needed money. A software startup needed cash to grow. Where were they supposed to go if JP Morgan said no? They went to the shadow banks. Shadow banking sounds illegal. Like something that happens in a dark alley with a guy breaking kneecaps. But in economics, it just means non-bank financial intermediation. It means lending money without taking deposits. Stephen Schwarzman saw this opening instantly. He realized that if the banks were retreating, Blackstone could advance. He could become the lender of last resort. So, Blackstone built a massive private credit arm. Today, this business is arguably even more important to their future than real estate. They manage hundreds of billions of dollars in loans. They lend to software companies. They lend to healthcare providers. They lend to energy companies. They even lend to other private equity firms. The difference is, Blackstone isn't regulated like a bank. They don't have the FDIC insuring them. They don't have the Federal Reserve watching their every move. They are faster, more aggressive, and they charge higher interest rates. For the last decade, private credit has been the hottest thing on Wall Street. Why? Because interest rates were zero, investors were starving for yield. So Blackstone said to them, "Give us your money. We will lend it to companies at 8%. It was a perfect sales pitch. Blackstone effectively became a matchmaker between the retirement savings of firefighters and risky corporate borrowers. This business exploded. In 2023, Blackstone merged its credit and insurance businesses. They are essentially a mega bank without the bank charter. But there is a catch. When a bank lends money, they usually require strict covenants. Private credit is often covenant light. It means fewer rules, fewer protections. Critics argue that this is building a massive hidden risk in the economy because these loans are private. They don't trade on a public exchange. We don't really know what they are worth. It is a black box, and inside that black box is a significant chunk of the American economy. But Schwarzman needed more fuel for his lending machine. He needed permanent capital. In the past, private equity firms had to go out and fundraise every few years. It was exhausting. Schwarzman wanted a pool of money that never ran dry. So he looked at the insurance industry. Insurance companies are essentially giant piles of cash. You pay your premiums. That money sits there for years. It is called the float. Blackstone decided to partner with and acquire insurance companies. They made a deal with Allstate. By controlling insurance companies, Blackstone got access to hundreds of billions of dollars of float. This is the same strategy Warren Buffett used to build Berkshire Hathaway. Regulators are starting to get nervous. Insurance money is supposed to be safe. If that money is tied up in risky commercial real estate loans, what happens if the bets go wrong? Could a crisis at Blackstone trigger a crisis in the insurance market? The scary thing about shadow banking is that it operates outside the safety net. If JP Morgan fails, the Federal Reserve has a playbook. If a shadow bank fails, there is no playbook. In 2023, we saw the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. But imagine a crisis in the private credit sector. Imagine interest rates stay high for a long time. The companies that borrowed money from Blackstone suddenly can't pay. They default. Blackstone would have to mark down the value of its loans. The investors would take losses. They might try to pull their money out. But remember, BREIT. The gates would close. The liquidity would freeze. This is why the IMF have issued warnings about the rapid growth of private credit. But Stephen Schwarzman isn't worried. He argues that private credit actually makes the system safer. He says they are the shock absorbers of the economy. It is a bold claim. And so far, he has been right. The machine keeps growing. When you become this big, when you become the landlord of America, you need protection. You need friends in high places. Stephen Schwarzman understands politics better than almost anyone on Wall Street. He doesn't just donate to politicians. He befriends them. He advises them. He was the chairman of President Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. He has the ear of leaders in China. He moves effortlessly between Washington, Beijing, and Riyadh. This political influence is the invisible force field around Blackstone. It helps explain why, despite all the complaints about housing and rents, Congress has done very little. There have been hearings. There have been bills proposed, but they usually die in committee. Why? Because the lobbying machine is just as efficient as the eviction machine. In the next part, we are going to expose the political web. We'll look at how Blackstone spends millions on lobbying. We'll look at Schwarzman's role in global geopolitics. And we will dive into the most sensitive topic of all, Blackstone's relationship with China. While BlackRock is getting heat for being woke, Blackstone has been quietly building a massive presence in the East. Is Schwarzman the bridge between the two superpowers? Or is he playing a dangerous game? The real landlord is also a diplomat. If Larry Fink is the philosopher king of Wall Street, Stephen Schwarzman is the king of the dinner party. He operates differently. He believes that business is personal. It is about relationships. While BlackRock relies on its massive size and its Aladdin supercomputer, Blackstone relies on the sheer force of personality of its founder. Schwarzman is a legendary networker. He knows every president. He knows every king. This isn't just vanity. It is a business strategy. When you are buying entire neighborhoods, you are operating in a highly regulated environment. One change in the tax code could wipe out your profits. So, you need insurance. And in Washington, D.C., insurance looks like lobbying. Blackstone hires former politicians and regulators. But the real influence comes from the revolving door. Take the issue of carried interest. This is the tax loophole that allows private equity billionaires to pay a lower tax rate than their secretaries. Every few years, Congress threatens to close this loophole, and every few years, it miraculously survives. Why? Because firms like Blackstone have made it clear that closing that loophole would be an act of war. Nowhere was this influence more visible than during the administration of Donald Trump. They are both New York real estate billionaires. They run in the same circles. When Trump became president, he created a strategic and policy forum. And who did he pick to lead it? Stephen Schwarzman. For a while, Schwarzman was effectively the most powerful businessman in the world. While other companies were terrified of Trump's unpredictable tweets, Blackstone was on the inside. They navigated the tax cuts of 2017, which were a massive windfall. But it was a double-edged sword. Being close to a polarizing president made Schwarzman a target. But the relationship remained. It showed the world that Blackstone wasn't just a financial player. But Schwarzman's political ambitions go far beyond Washington. His most significant relationship is with China. While politicians in D.C. were beating the drums of war against China, Stephen Schwarzman was building bridges. He is often called the China Whisperer. He has cultivated deep, decades-long relationships with the Chinese leadership. He has acted as an intermediary, a back channel between the White House and Beijing. Why? Because China is critical to Blackstone. Blackstone wants access to Chinese capital. The Chinese Sovereign Wealth Fund was one of the first investors. To cement this relationship, Schwarzman did something extraordinary. He built a college. He donated over $100 million of his own money at Tsinghua University in Beijing. It is modeled after the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. The goal is to bring the brightest young minds to China to study, to network, and to understand China. Schwarzman says this is about peace. There is a fascinating contrast between Blackstone and BlackRock when it comes to politics. As we discussed, Larry Fink at BlackRock is constantly getting hammered for ESG. He is attacked for being woke. Stephen Schwarzman and Blackstone rarely get attacked for this. Why? It comes down to the nature of their assets. BlackRock owns public stocks. They have to vote at shareholder meetings. Voting is a public act. It forces you to take a stand. If you vote for a diversity proposal, the right hates you. If you vote against it, the left hates you. Blackstone owns private assets. They own the company. They don't have to vote at a public meeting because they are the meeting. If Blackstone wants a company they own to be green, they just tell the management to do it. They don't write a public letter. This private nature shields them from the culture wars, while Larry Fink is the lightning rod. Stephen Schwarzman operates in the shadows. However, this is changing. The housing crisis has dragged Blackstone into the public eye. Owning homes is political. Evicting tenants is political. Blackstone is finding that you cannot own the physical world without getting dirty. The biggest threat to Blackstone today isn't a market crash. It is the government. Specifically, the anger over the housing market is boiling over. There are bills being proposed in Congress that would ban hedge funds and private equity firms from owning single-family homes. If such a law passed, it would force Blackstone to sell thousands of homes. Currently, the gridlock in Washington makes this unlikely, but the sentiment is growing. Democrats and Republicans don't agree on much, but they both agree that Wall Street shouldn't own Main Street. Blackstone is ramping up its defense. They are publishing reports showing that they are good landlords. But the narrative is slipping away from them. The image of the corporate landlord has become a boogeyman. In the final part of our series, we will look at the future. What happens if the housing market crashes again? Will Blackstone buy even more homes? We will also look at the succession plan. Stephen Schwarzman is in his 70s. Who will replace the King of Capital? And finally, we will give you the tenant's guide. How do you survive? We have traveled through the wreckage of the 2008 housing crash. We have walked through the warehouses. Right now, as we speak, the commercial real estate market is shaking. Office buildings in New York are half empty. Interest rates are high. Owners are defaulting on their loans. Most people see a crisis. Stephen Schwarzman sees a sale. Blackstone is sitting on a mountain of cash. In the industry, they call it dry powder. It is estimated that Blackstone has over $200 billion of dry powder ready to deploy. While you are worrying about a recession, Blackstone is likely praying for one. A recession is the clearance sale. But this time, the target might not be single-family homes. It might be data centers for artificial intelligence. Blackstone has pivoted to become the landlord of the AI revolution. They are buying land to build the massive server farms. That power ChatGPT and Google Gemini. They know that data is the new oil, and data needs a home. Stephen Schwarzman is the face of Blackstone, but kings eventually pass the crown. The man waiting in the wings is Jonathan Gray. John Gray. If Schwarzman is the aggressive dealmaker from the 80s, John Gray is the calm, analytical architect of the modern era. Gray is the man who built Blackstone's real estate empire. He is the one who came up with the idea to buy the Hilton hotel chain when everyone said travel was dead. He is seen as nicer, softer, less flashy than Schwarzman. But do not mistake kindness for weakness. John Gray is arguably even more ruthless in his efficiency. He industrialized the real estate market. Under John Gray, Blackstone is expected to become even more embedded in the global economy. He wants to make Blackstone a household name, not just for billionaires, but for regular investors. He envisions a world where your retirement account, your insurance policy, and your savings account are all funneled into Blackstone products. He wants to be the vanguard of private markets. This succession plan is critical. Often, empires crumble when the founder leaves. But Blackstone has built a machine that is bigger than any one man. So, after 6 parts, we have to answer the question: is Blackstone evil? It is the question everyone asks in the comments. If you are a tenant who got evicted by an algorithm, the answer is yes. Blackstone represents a cold, unfeeling force that treats your home like a bond yield. If you are a young family and you keep getting outbid by all cash offers from Wall Street, the answer is yes. Blackstone has distorted the market and made the American dream harder to achieve. But if you are a retired teacher whose pension fund invested in Blackstone, the answer is no. Blackstone saved your retirement. This is the complexity of modern capitalism. Blackstone isn't stealing money. They are generating returns for their investors. And their investors are ultimately us, the pension funds, the endowments. We demand high returns on our savings. Blackstone delivers them. But to deliver them, They have to squeeze the economy for efficiency. Blackstone is a mirror. It reflects the incentives of the system we built. Stephen Schwarzman didn't write the tax code that favors debt. He didn't write the zoning laws. He just played the game better than anyone else. So, how do you survive in a world owned by Blackstone? Here is the tenant's guide to the private equity era. Rule number 1 is identify your landlord. Before you rent, find out who owns the building. Is it a person or is it an LLC? If it is a corporate landlord, expect rent hikes, expect fees, budget accordingly. Rule number 2 is own assets. You cannot win against inflation and asset appreciation by just working a job. You need to be on the side of the owners. If you can't afford a house, buy REITs. Buy stocks. Buy Bitcoin. Buy anything that is scarce. You need to get off the hamster wheel of paying rent and onto the escalator of asset ownership. Rule number 3 is understand the cycle. Blackstone buys when markets are fearful. You should learn from that. Don't panic when the news is bad. That is often the best time to act. And finally, rule number 4 is local politics. The only force that can stop a global landlord is a local government. Zoning laws, rent control, eviction protections. These are decided at the city council level. If you're angry, yelling at Stephen Schwarzman on Twitter won't change anything. Showing up to your local zoning board meeting might. We are entering a new phase of history. The era of the owner society is fading. The era of the renter society is rising. It is a world where you subscribe to everything. You subscribe to your music, your movies, your software, your car, and now, your house. Blackstone is the architect of this new world. They realized that ownership is heavy, and rent is cash flow. It is efficient, it is profitable, but is it the world we want to live in? A home is more than an asset. It is a place where memories are made. When we turn homes into financial instruments, we gain efficiency, but we lose humanity. The real landlord is here to stay. The question is, will we be just tenants in his world? Or will we find a way to reclaim our own piece of the earth? This has been The Real Landlord. We have exposed the strategies, the history, and the future of the company that bought America. Thank you for watching. If you found this valuable, please subscribe. Leave a comment below. Stay educated. Stay vigilant. And keep watching the money.